I still remember the exact weight of that box. It was a simple thing, repurposed from a case of court transcripts, its cardboard corners soft and worn from years of being shoved under my bed. Inside was a signed promissory note, a stack of bank statements, and one hidden email that would eventually put my stepson in a federal prison cell. If you had told me on that cold Tuesday morning that I would end up owning a stationery boutique, with a debt collection smark hanging in the back room, I would have said you were insane. But here I am, 27 months later, watching that same stepson grind nibs for $11 an hour in a smark that reads "bled my pension," and every single receipt that prints from my register has his fraud docket number stamped at the bottom. This is the story of how a 55-year-old woman with a court reporter's ear for lies dismantled a scheme that was supposed to leave her broke, blamed, and completely alone. My name is Diane Harrow. For 27 years I sat in the corner of courtrooms across 3 counties in Ohio, my Stentura 8000 stenotype machine clicking away at 225 words per minute, capturing every objection, every whispered conference, every nervous cough. You learn to hear things other people miss. You learn to read the pause before a lie, the slight lift at the end of a sentence that means the witness is asking a question they already know the answer to. I carried a small magnifying glass in my purse, not for reading the fine print in insurance policies, but because I once spent 6 weeks transcribing the testimony of a question document examiner and learned that a forged signature almost always betrays itself in the baseline pressure. That detail sat in my brain for years, quiet and patient until the day I needed it. My husband Richard was a quiet architect, the kind of man who sharpened his drafting pencils with a knife and never raised his voice. He died 11 years ago, leaving me to raise his son Marcus, who was 8 at the time. Richard had been a careful man, and before he died he made me promise 2 things. Number 1, get every loan agreement notarized. Number 2, file a UCC-1 financing statement on any business asset Marcus ever owned. He said a loan without a public lien is just a gift. I thought that was paranoia at the time. It was not. Marcus grew up with Richard's steady hands and my ear for nuance. When he came to me at 30 years old with a business plan for a custom fountain pen and archival ink boutique, I listened. He had spent 2 years apprenticing with a nib technician in Columbus and another year studying ink chemistry. His business plan was thorough, his projections were modest, and his passion was real. I dipped into my pension early, took the tax hit, and wrote that boy a check for $128,000. Not because I am a saint, because he looked me in the eye and told me he wanted to build something real. We signed a promissory note in front of a notary named Patricia Gomez. We filed the UCC-1. I kept my copy in the box under my bed. The discovery happened on a Thursday. Marcus had been running his boutique, Nib and Ledger, for just over 2 years. Custom fountain pens, imported archival inks, Japanese nib tuning, the whole 9 yards. He had a talent for it, I will give him that. His handwriting was surgical, his eye for color sharp, and the little shop on 5th Street had developed a loyal following among lawyers, judges, and the kind of people who still wrote thank you notes by hand. Then the luxury chain came calling. Stationery Republic, that behemoth of leather journals and overpriced ballpoints, offered $580,000 for his proprietary ink formulas and his entire inventory. Marcus told me the news at my kitchen table with a bottle of cheap champagne and a smile that did not reach his eyes. I told him I was proud of him. I told him my 45% share would be enough to replenish my pension and maybe take a trip to see the redwoods. He squeezed my hand and said, "Of course, Diane, you believed in me first." 3 days later I received a FedEx envelope. No note, no explanation, just a cashier's check for $4,100. The memo line read, "Nib reimbursement." That check was less than half of 1% of what I was owed. I called Marcus, no answer. I called the shop. A woman's voice told me that Marcus was in a meeting. That woman was Dawn, the new girlfriend, the one with the MBA and the Instagram account full of flat-lay photos of her breakfast. I drove to the shop the next morning and found the locks changed. A young man in an apron told me the business had transitioned to new ownership. When I asked for Marcus, he shrugged. When I asked for Dawn, he handed me a business card for an LLC registered to a UPS store mailbox. That afternoon, Marcus and Dawn showed up at my house. They said they were worried about my stress level. They said they wanted to help me sort through some old paperwork to prepare for the sale closing. Dawn was wearing a cream blazer and holding a stainless steel water bottle, and she kept glancing around my living room like she was auditing the furniture. Marcus was quieter, but his jaw was tight. He said, "Diane, you have a lot of clutter in here." Old files, old boxes, it is not healthy, let us help you clear some space. I watched Dawn open my bedroom closet, kneel down and pull out the cardboard box from under the bed. She held it up by the corners like it was a dead animal. She said, "What is this? Old junk, you should toss it." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face soft. I said, "Oh, that is just some old tax records. I have been meaning to go through them." Marcus said, "Perfect, we can take it with the rest of the recycling." And before I could object without looking suspicious, Dawn had already dropped the box into a black trash bag. They stayed for another hour, pouring through my mail and making a list of things to donate. I smiled and offered them tea. When they finally left, the trash bag was sitting at the curb. I waited until their car turned the corner. Then I walked outside in my slippers, lifted the bag out of the bin and carried it back into the house. The box was slightly damp from a coffee ground, but intact. Inside, under a stack of bank statements, I found the original promissory note. It was signed by Marcus in blue ink, witnessed by a notary named Patricia Gomez. There were bank statements showing the wire transfer from my pension account. There were handwritten notes from our early planning sessions, sketches of pen bodies, a sample vial of a deep burgundy ink he had named Magistrate's Blood. And at the very bottom, under a stack of deposit slips, there was a single manila folder I did not recognize. It was unmarked. I opened it and found a printed email chain. The first email was from Marcus to Dawn, dated 6 weeks earlier. The subject line was Transfer Mechanics. The body was short. Move the formulas and the inventory into your LLC before the LOI expires. Then we drain the business account, default on the lease and tell her the sale fell through. We keep the 100. The next email was from Dawn to Marcus. "What about the notarized note?" And Marcus replied, "She keeps it in a box under her bed. She thinks it is sacred. She will never check. Just send her a small check to establish good faith." Something for Nibs, then we go quiet. I read that email 7 times. On the 7th time I noticed the metadata at the bottom. The printout included the full header information, the IP addresses, the timestamps. It was a direct forward to my personal email address, but I had never seen it before. That was when I noticed the sticky note attached to the back of the folder, written in Richard's handwriting. I would know that tight architectural script anywhere. It said, "Diane, if you are reading this, someone has hurt you. Do not trust them, save yourself, use the box." I sat on the floor and laughed until I cried. Richard had been dead for 11 years, but somehow before he died he had set up a rule in my email account. Any message containing certain keywords, including Marcus, transfer, LLC, promissory note, and a few others, would be automatically forwarded to a hidden folder and printed. He had built a dead man's switch into my own inbox. The man had seen the future. He just never found the right moment to warn me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a signed promise is not just paper, it is a debt that follows you. Now let me tell you exactly how I brought them down. The manipulation started the very next day. Marcus showed up at my door with a bouquet of white lilies and a concerned expression. He said the sale had fallen through. He said Dawn's LLC had been a temporary holding company to shield the assets from a predatory supplier. He said the $4,100 was a token of good faith, a reimbursement for a Nibs shipment that had been lost in customs. He said he was going to make everything right, but I needed to be patient. Then he handed me a stack of papers, a release of promissory note, a waiver of profit share, a power of attorney granting him authority to manage my remaining pension disbursements. He called it housekeeping. He said his lawyer recommended it to protect my interests. He said, "Diane, you know I would never hurt you. You raised me." And then he did the thing he used to do when he was 8 years old and wanted a second bowl of ice cream. He tilted his head, softened his eyes and said, "Please, trust me." I looked at him for a long moment. I could hear the slight lift at the end of that please. The same inflection I had heard 1,000 times in courtrooms, the sound of a witness testing the waters, checking to see if the judge was buying it. I smiled and said, "Of course, sweetheart. Let me look these over tomorrow. Can I bring them to your office in the afternoon?" His shoulders relaxed so visibly that I almost felt sorry for him. That evening I called a contact from my old court reporting days, a forensic document examiner named Ellen Park. I described the release form in detail, reading her the exact language of the covenant not to sue, the assignment of interest, the power of attorney. She told me that if I signed it, I would be legally surrendering every claim I had. She also told me that the power of attorney was drafted in a way that would let him access my pension directly, and that the release contained a clause stating I had received full consideration for the loan, even though I had received almost nothing. Then she said the one thing that changed everything. She said, "Diane, do not sign a single page, but do not tell him you are not signing either. Play weak, play confused, be the woman they think you are." So I did. The next morning I called Marcus and told him my arthritis was flaring up, that my mind felt foggy, that I needed a few days to rest. He told me I should come stay with him and Dawn, that they had a guest room, that they would take care of me. His voice was warm and patient, but underneath it I heard something else. The cadence of a man who has already spent my pension in his head. I packed a small suitcase. I left the box under my bed, but I took the key and the folded sticky note in Richard's handwriting inside the lining of my reading glasses case. Then I drove to their house. The house was a new build in a subdivision called Beacon Ridge, all grey vinyl siding and black window frames, the kind of place where every lawn is a perfect rectangle and every mailbox is brick. Marcus and Dawn had bought it 8 months earlier, around the same time the Stationery Republic offer came in. I remember thinking on some level that his spending had been suspicious for a while. The new Audi in the driveway, the watch on his wrist, the espresso machine that cost more than my first car. But I had told myself it was business growth, that a rising tide lifts all boats. I had ignored the smell of smoke because I did not want to see the fire. The guest room was at the end of the hall, a small beige box with an air freshener plugged into the wall and a framed print of a motivational quote about gratitude. I unpacked my suitcase, hung my blouses in the closet and began my new job. I was not a guest. I was a hostage with a smile. The first thing they did was take my house key for safekeeping. The second was to move my car to the far side of the garage and park the Audi behind it. Dawn said it was so I would not have to worry about driving while I rested. I thanked her. I did not mention that I had memorized the garage door code 2 hours after I arrived. For the first 3 days, I did nothing but watch. I sat in the breakfast nook with a cup of tea and my reading glasses, pretending to scroll through old court transcripts on my tablet, while actually cataloguing every conversation I could hear. Marcus took frantic phone calls in his office, a converted bedroom on the first floor. I could not make out the words through the door, but I could hear the rhythm. The short, clipped questions, the long, panicked pauses, the rising pitch when someone on the other end delivered bad news. One morning he said into the phone, "Just tell me the wire cleared. Tell me it cleared." Then there was a crash, the sound of a coffee mug hitting drywall, then a second crash like a desk chair being kicked across the room. Dawn was no better. She spent her days on Instagram, photographing her meals and her manicured hands, but every time I walked past her laptop, I saw spreadsheets open behind a browser full of shopping tabs. She ordered custom stationery for the LLC. She bought $2,000 worth of imported Japanese washi tape. She booked a weekend trip to Napa. All of it on credit, I assumed. All of it unsustainable. One evening I heard them arguing in the kitchen. Dawn said, "You told me the lawyer would handle the release." Marcus said, "She is stalling. She keeps saying she is tired." Then Dawn said the words that made my blood run cold. She said, "If she does not sign by Friday, we lose the escrow, and if we lose the escrow, we lose everything." Friday, that was 5 days away. I marked the date in my mental calendar and began to plan. The next day I found my first piece of physical evidence. I was doing laundry, something I had volunteered to do to seem helpful and harmless. Marcus had left a pair of chinos in the machine, and I emptied the pockets before washing them. Inside the front right pocket was a crumpled receipt. It was for a cashier's check in the amount of $20,000, made payable to a company called Inkflow Distribution. I did not recognize the name. What I did recognize was the purchase date. It was 2 days after I had written the original loan check. $20,000 of my pension money had gone to a distributor under a name I had never heard. I smoothed out the receipt and tucked it into the zippered compartment of my suitcase. That afternoon I caused an accident, a small, controlled one. I knocked over a glass of water in the hallway near Marcus's office. The water seeped under the door and I made a show of apologizing, of grabbing towels, of needing to wipe up the mess. Marcus opened the door and told me not to worry, but I had already seen what I needed to see. A filing cabinet in the corner, a shredder next to the desk, and on the floor, visible through the gap before he closed the door, a stack of papers that looked like bank statements. That night after the house went quiet, I went to work. I had a small toolkit in my suitcase, something I had carried for years after covering a series of lockpicking trials for a local locksmith. I had learned the trade out of boredom, and I had practiced on the filing cabinets in the courthouse basement. The lock on Marcus's office door was a cheap brass schlage, the kind you can open with a tension wrench and a rake in under 90 seconds. I waited until 1 in the morning when the house settled into a deep, indifferent silence, and then I slipped down the hall in my bare feet. The office smelled like coffee and burnt paper. The shredder was full and I could see the ragged edges of documents inside. I opened the filing cabinet first. It was unlocked. Inside there were folders labeled with categories I knew too well from years of court reporting. Bank records, loan documents, insurance forms, corporate filings. I found the folder for ink flow distribution. Inside was a loan agreement for $110,000, secured against the assets of Nib and Ledger. The loan had been taken out in my name. My signature was on the document, but when I held the paper up to the light, I could see the telltale signs of a cut-and-paste job. The baseline of the signature was off by a fraction of a degree. The pressure pattern was uneven. The ink was too uniform, almost certainly printed from a high-resolution scan of an old document I had signed years ago. A loan in my name for a business I had not known existed, secured against assets I had unknowingly funded. I photographed every page with my phone, careful to turn off the flash, and placed the folder back exactly where I had found it. Then I turned to the shredder. The bin was full of thin strips, and I knew from experience that reconstructing shredded documents was possible but tedious. I did not have time for tedious. What I needed was the one strip that would confirm what I already suspected. I sifted through the bin for 10 minutes, my heart pounding, my ears tuned to every creak of the house. And there it was, a strip with a partial email address, Dawn Carter, and beneath it, in a slightly different font, the words "New ownership transfer confirmed." I pocketed the strip and returned to my room. The next morning I called the bank, not the local branch where Marcus had taken me to sign documents over the years, but the main compliance office in Columbus. I told them I was calling about suspicious activity on an account tied to my name. I spoke in the calm, clipped tone of a court reporter who has spent decades asking for clarification on the record. The woman on the other end transferred me to a man named Gerald, who worked in the fraud prevention unit. I told Gerald my story in broad strokes, and then I sent him the photographs of the loan document. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Ms. Harrow, I need you to understand something. If this document is a forgery, and if it was used to secure a loan, we are talking about bank fraud. That is federal. Are you willing to cooperate with an investigation?" I told him I was willing to do a lot more than cooperate. I asked him what he needed. He said, "I need the original document." I told him I could get it. We hung up. The following day I found the hidden email. I had noticed that Marcus frequently left his laptop open on the kitchen island, especially in the morning when he was distracted by his espresso machine and his phone. I waited for the right moment, a Tuesday morning when he was on a panicked call in his office and Dawn was upstairs doing a face mask. I sat down at the kitchen island, opened his email application, and searched for the hidden email I had found in the box under my bed. It was still there, buried in his sent folder. But there was more. A draft to Stationery Republic dated 3 weeks earlier, in which Marcus confirmed that the ink formulas and inventory had been transferred to a holding company called Dawn Carter LLC, and that any sale proceeds should be directed to a new account at a regional bank. The draft had not been sent. He had been about to send it when he was interrupted. I forwarded the email to myself, then I deleted the forwarding record from his sent folder. It was sloppy, yes, but I was running out of time. And then I got up, walked to the sliding glass door and stepped outside to call Gerald. Gerald had news of his own. The bank had flagged the loan application tied to the forged signature, but the loan had already been funded. The money had been moved through 3 shell accounts and was now sitting in an escrow account linked to Dawn's LLC. Gerald said the escrow was scheduled to close on Friday, which matched the argument I had overheard. He said if I could provide the original promissory note and a copy of the forged loan document, he could freeze the escrow and trigger a federal investigation. He also said something that made my hands shake. He said, "Diane, there is a clock running on this. The loan goes into default on Monday. If that happens, the bank can seize the assets secured against it. Those assets include the Nib and Ledger inventory and formulas, and because your signature is on the loan, you would be listed as the primary debtor." I was being set up as the legal scapegoat for their entire scheme. Bank fraud, tax evasion, and a forged promissory note, all of it was about to land on my shoulders. But Gerald also found something else, something that made him pause in the middle of his explanation. He said the escrow had not closed yet because of a UCC-1 filing on the business assets. It was a lien registered in my name, dated the same week I wrote the original check. The title search had flagged it, and the closing agent was demanding a notarized release from me before any funds could move. Marcus and Dawn had been trying to get me to sign that release all week. They could not close without my physical presence at the closing table, my government ID, and my notarized signature. Richard had set that up before he died. He had made me file the lien as a condition of the loan, a dead man's switch tied to my own living body. Without me, the money was frozen. Without my willingness to sign, the scheme could not complete. Richard had not just warned me from the grave, he had built a wall around me. That night I staged the medical scare. I had practiced the maneuver for hours in my head. I was in the living room watching a home renovation show with the volume low. Marcus and Dawn were both home, arguing about something in the kitchen. I stood up from the couch, took 3 steps toward the hallway, and then I let my body go slack. I fell in a controlled way, my knees hitting the carpet first, then my hip, then my shoulder. I let out a low, gurgling moan and lay still, my eyes half closed, my breathing shallow. I looked, I hoped, like a woman in the middle of a cardiac event. But before I did it, I had turned on the voice memo app on my phone and slipped the phone into the pocket of my cardigan, microphone facing up. I wanted a record. I wanted to know exactly who I was dealing with. Marcus came around the corner first. He stopped. He looked down at me. I saw his face, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He did not kneel. He did not call for Dawn. He did not check my pulse. Instead, he walked around me and went straight to the kitchen table where my reading glasses case was sitting next to a stack of papers. He opened the case. He shook his head. He walked back toward me, still not touching me, and said, "Where are the papers, Diane? Where are the release forms?" His voice was flat, almost bored. I lay there, my face pressed against the carpet, and I felt something inside me snap clean in half. The last remaining thread of maternal loyalty, the part of me that had raised this boy, that had packed his lunches and taught him how to tie a tie, that part of me died right there on that beige carpet. He stepped over my body to grab a document. He could not even be bothered to check if I was alive. I let out a weak cough and whispered my chest. He ignored me. He turned to Dawn, who had come into the room, and said, "She does not have the papers. Call the lawyer, tell him we need a backup." Dawn looked down at me, her face twisted with something like annoyance, and said, "What do we do about her?" Marcus shrugged. "We wait. She either signs on Friday or we forge her signature again and take the escrow anyway." He said this in front of me, assuming I was too weak to understand. I closed my eyes and memorized every word. The voice memo app kept recording. The next morning I was gone before sunrise. I packed my suitcase, took my reading glasses case and drove straight to the bank in Columbus. Gerald met me in a private conference room. I gave him the original promissory note, the photographs of the forged loan document, the hidden email, the strip from the shredder, and a handwritten affidavit describing everything I had seen and heard. I also played him the voice memo from the night before. Gerald made copies, he made calls. He brought in 2 federal investigators from the Columbus field office. For 6 hours I answered questions. I described the scheme. I provided times, dates, bank account numbers, and the names of the shell companies. I told them about the escrow deadline on Friday. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, a federal judge signed an emergency order freezing the escrow account. The sale to Stationery Republic was voided. The loan was flagged as fraudulent. The LLC was placed under investigation. But the agents did not arrest anyone yet. They wanted the closing to happen. They wanted Marcus and Dawn in the room when they tried to force me one last time. On Friday, the day the escrow was supposed to close, I walked into the bank with Gerald and 2 federal agents in plain clothes. The closing was scheduled for 10 o'clock in a small conference room on the 2nd floor. Marcus was already there, pacing in front of a window, his phone pressed to his ear. Dawn sat at the table, a leather portfolio open in front of her, a gold pen in her hand. The closing agent, a nervous young woman with a stack of documents, looked up when I entered. I had not signed the release. I had not signed anything. Marcus saw me and ended his call. He smiled, but it was the smile of a man who had not slept in 3 days. He said, "Diane, you made it. Let's get this done." He reached for my elbow. I pulled away and sat down at the table. The closing agent began to explain the documents. A final release of the UCC-1 lien, a ratification of the asset transfer, a waiver of any claim to the sale proceeds. She pushed a pen toward me. Marcus leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "Sign it, Diane, just sign it and this whole thing is over." Dawn added, "We are doing this for you, for your future." I looked at the pen. It was one of his own, a custom fountain pen with a black resin barrel and a gold nib. I picked it up, unscrewed the cap and set it down again. I looked Marcus in the eye and said, "I'm not signing anything, Marcus. You forged my name once. You do not get my real one." His face changed. The mask fell. He lunged across the table and grabbed my wrist. He said, "You stupid old woman, you think you are clever. You think you can take everything from me." I did not flinch. I said, "I am not taking anything, Marcus. I'm just holding you to the same standard you promised me when you signed that note. Integrity is not a suggestion. It is the only thing you have left, and you sold it for a used Audi and a kitchen island. Gerald stepped forward and the two agents stood up. The door opened. 4 more agents came in from the hallway. Marcus let go of my wrist. Dawn started to say something about a lawyer, but one of the agents was already reading Miranda rights. The closing agent backed into the corner, clutching her documents. Marcus was cuffed and led out. Dawn followed, her designer handbag left on the table, later seized as evidence. I watched them go and I felt no satisfaction at first, just a strange, hollow quiet. Then I walked out of the bank, stood on the sidewalk in the cold morning air and let the sun hit my face. For the first time in weeks I could breathe. The aftermath was quiet and slow. The federal investigation took 11 months. Marcus pleaded guilty to bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Dawn received 5 years for her role in the scheme. The LLC was dissolved. The escrow funds, along with the remaining proceeds from the voided sale, were returned to me through a restitution order. It was not a windfall. It was the money I had earned, the pension I had sacrificed, plus interest and legal fees. I used a portion of it to buy the remaining inventory and formulas from the bankruptcy trustee. I reopened the shop under a new name. Ink of Deceit Writing Instruments. It is a modest storefront on a quiet street with a hand-painted sign and a small workshop in the back. Marcus was released after 4 years, and because his credit was destroyed and no one would hire him, he came to me. He asked for a job. I gave him one. He works in the back room, grinding nibs and cleaning ink reservoirs. He wears a grey smock with the words "Bled my pension" printed across the back in dark red lettering. Every receipt that prints from my register has a line at the bottom that reads, "This purchase supports a former fraudster." Docket number 2, 19 CR 000447. It is petty, I know, but it is also a reminder. Richard was the quiet architect of my safety net. He saw the shape of this betrayal before I did, and he left me a box under the bed with a warning I almost never found. He taught me that the people who love you do not just leave you with memories. They leave you with tools. You just have to be willing to open the box. So here is my question for you. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe that a signed promise is a debt that follows you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories about the quiet art of accountability. I will see you in the next one.